Hey everyone, Mark and Steve here.
Before we get started today, we want to let you know about Dare to Connect, our new online interactive video platform.
For less than the cost of a therapy session, you and your spouse get live access to both of us 3 times a week.
Each 30-minute live group support session provides interactive mentoring and healing for addicts, spouses, and couples.
If you're loving our podcast and our unique style of bringing you recovery, you're going to love Dare to Connect.
To learn more, go to daretoconnectnow.com. We're looking forward to seeing and working with you. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the PBSC podcast. I'm Steve Moore. I've got Mark Castleman here with me today, as always. It's great to be with all of you today. We've got a really good topic to cover. We are going to talk about disclosure today. Yeah, it's
big topic.
It is a big topic. And you know, these podcasts go fast, and so we're going to just kind of jump into this. But we really wanted to make this podcast today definitely focused on specifically those spouses out there. You know, what should not a podcast, what should a disclosure look like, right? How should that look? What components ought to be included, at least on a baseline level, and why do we do them?
We do a lot of work with addicts and preparing them for their disclosures. And we've talked about this a lot on the PBSC podcast over the months and years. But I don't know, Steve, if we've ever done a podcast specifically for the spouse.
Yeah, I don't know that we have either, nor have we really gone through at least kind of an overview of what it should look like and what you can expect.
Yeah. So it's a great topic.
Yeah, we're really excited to kind of tackle it. We do disclosures exclusively for spouses. Okay. And that's an important thing to recognize.
Well, and I want to make sure everyone just heard what you said.
Yeah.
All the work we do with addicts in helping them prepare their disclosures and be totally transparent and authentic and get everything out on the table. Did you hear what Steve just said? We do all of that for the primary benefit of the spouse.
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, there's a side benefit to the addict. Of course, we want him to learn to be truthful. We want him to get out of a shame cycle, all of those things. But yeah, I agree. The work I do, the full emphasis in this disclosure process is on the spouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it needs to be, right? I mean, there's so much, we talk so much about betrayal on here and the insanity, the literal insanity that accompanies betrayal. And disclosure is one of those major steps in the recovery process where that provides a footing for a partner of somebody who's been struggling with deception and compulsion and concealment and all of those things. It really is a forum for a spouse to kind of get it out all on the table and to be able to really provide a bedrock for healing, right?
Yeah. And as we look at this, and please know, after all these years of working with spouses who are about to hear the disclosure of their addict spouse, this is an emotional Goliath. I mean, we cannot understate what you spouses are facing as you're preparing for your husband's disclosure. This is huge. And so as we look at that, first of all, Steve, maybe we can quickly say, as a spouse, what should you expect of him in this process?
Definitely. And everyone does disclosures a little bit differently. I guess we'll talk about the need for a therapist here in this process at the end, but yeah, on the part of an addict, there should definitely be a couple of baseline things that are provided in this arena. So the first right, as the name implies, is there needs to be a complete accounting, right, of everything that has happened with regard to the sexual compulsion and the betrayal. Now, because these disclosures are for spouses, like when I facilitate disclosures in my office, I put a spouse in the driver's seat on a couple of things in this area. For example, for some spouses, it's really helpful in healing to hear the entire span of what this addiction, what this compulsion has looked like, and how it's manifested both in the marriage, but also since it began, in some cases.
If it started when he was 5 years old, it's important to hear the general aspects of how that came about.
Yes.
And the reason that's important is so that the spouse doesn't think somehow that she's responsible for all of this.
For sure.
He brought this with him.
Now, every partner also, I have had partners over the years where they have actually made it very clear they'd actually prefer not to do that.
True.
They would like to focus this more on the betrayal strictly component and just focus on that from when the relationship began onwards. And we go through a process of discussing the pros and cons and the advantages and disadvantages of that. And then we'll kind of set something that way. But regardless, right, it should, from wherever point it begins, the idea, the main premise here is complete transparency about at least all of the actions that were taken in addiction, as well as, if appropriate, some of the context as to why that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's important to note that context does not mean in any way that this is done. And this is one of the reasons why a therapist is so important. This does not become here are the reasons. And so me betraying you was okay.
Yeah. Here are the excuses for why I did all this.
Yes, that reasons versus excuses topic we talk about often on here is important. Addicts, and partners, it's really easy to get pulled into disclosure becoming that, and it's absolutely critical that if there is context given, it's just that. It's just context. It's meant to fill in the gap of. So, for example, if I'm doing a disclosure with a partner, and I'm talking about my dad passing away in the plane crash at 13, like as he did. That's going to be through the lens of, there were a lot of things going on and I was lacking and did not have better ways of coping. And unfortunately, I chose, right? I made the decision to engage, and tried to cope in these ways.
Yes.
So it's through that lens of accountability and ownership of this is my thing to change. Not I would have been just fine, but God killed my dad, hun. So that's why I do this. And
right.
Here you go.
Yeah,
right.
Very big difference between those.
Absolutely. Yeah. But if done correctly, that context can be really helpful in the healing process as long as the accountability is there. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's on a baseline. But there are other components that we will add to that as well. But we really wanted to focus today's podcast specifically on your rights essentially in the disclosure and what things you can be expected to be able to do, how to engage with it, and things that you are entitled to as you go through this process.
Yep. So let's talk about what we're calling the 4 primary rights that you have as a spouse in this disclosure process that your addict partner is going to present to you. What are the 4 primary rights that you have?
Love that.
And the first one of those is you have the right to choose when and how, if at all, this disclosure process happens.
Yep.
When and how will that occur? You are in the driver's seat with regard to that.
And there's a lot of preparation that it goes into these beforehand. Like as I've said before on here, when I set up disclosures with coupleships, there is a lot of rigorous work. I usually the prep time for these, depending on how often I'm meeting with the client and where they're at, is a minimum of a couple of months and can easily go beyond that. So this is not something that we just cobble together in one sit down and just throw together and do. And that prep work is for not just for the addict and him being accountable and making sure he's being honest and all that stuff. There's a lot of prep work that we do with our partners, with you spouses about, and a big part of that, the first start is, let's talk about the pros and the cons, right, of this and when to do it, if at all. Because there does need to be, for example, a certain degree of a kind of a critical mass of trust in the relationship, right? That there's going to be transparency in this disclosure, right? We're trying to provide, among what else we're trying to provide in a disclosure, a reset, right? We're trying to provide a launching point from where a spouse and also the relationship can kind of leap from forward in the disclosure process if we've gotten it all out there, right? We've talked about all these things, or, we've gotten the past out there. So now we can not just dismiss the past, but we can, we've got some sure footing from which to operate from so that we're all on the same page.
Yep. So we can start hopefully moving forward, right?
Yes.
Even if just one little teeny tiny step at a time, right? But there needs to be a getting it all out onto the table. And you as the spouse get to choose how and when that happens. Now, you mentioned something, Steve. I'm going to bring it up just real quick about spouses will say, well, how do I know if he's telling the truth? How do I know if it's all out on the table? There's been so many years of gaslighting and, all of me feeling crazy, like I don't know what's true and what isn't. How am I going to know that this is a full disclosure?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that the fullness of that disclosure, it really does rely on that trust piece, and so we will do a lot of prep work around that, just kind of depending where the relationship is at, to make sure that is something that we're really ready for and something that we're able to, it's going to be something that you're going to be able to internalize, right? The only thing worse than doing a disclosure and having it go badly is doing a disclosure and having it go badly because you don't trust anything that you heard.
Yeah. You don't trust anything you heard. So there's a lot of building blocks leading up to that, other things that are happening in the relationship, other ways he's being honest, right?
Yes.
Check-ins happening on a daily basis. There's just a lot of components to that. Sometimes, I do have clients where they bring, for example, the polygraph process into this.
Yes, absolutely.
I want him to take a poly. Once he's completed the disclosure and he's got it ready for presentation, I want to have somebody polygraph him to see if it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that a fair amount of clients do elect to do. And it is something that we open the door for. And that obviously goes into trust and a whole other set of dynamics that we don't have time to talk about today. But you do need to have the feel that freedom to be able to call some of the shots, so to speak, on kind of how this thing happens so that it can be healing for you. That's right. Again, that's the whole point.
So the second of those 4 rights is the right along these lines to ask questions.
Yes.
And as we say that, it's very important that we put a caveat to that, asking questions in a boundaried way, a healthy way. Because here's what I've seen over all the years. And ladies, as you're listening to this, please, from the deepest part of my heart, I really have empathy and try to understand where you're coming from. But there is this in a desire to feel safe. I just have this compulsion that I need to follow him every day and extract information. I need to pound him with questions because I've got to know. And then when I know this, then I want to know more. And okay, you gave me that detail, but how about these details? And that could become an endless pursuit where you're just questioning outside of a formal process and outside of a boundaried, healthy approach, because you're trying to feel safe. I can feel safe if I know all of it. And I need to pursue him like on a daily basis to know all of it.
Yeah.
You will drive yourself crazy with that approach and process. But it's understandable, very understandable why you would do that. Yeah.
Well, and it is the brain's natural response, right? Following betrayal, and again, this is just a quick review of some stuff we've talked about before there. The brain is naturally inclined to seek safety in the details, right? It's trying to kind of form its new reality following the fallout of betrayal. And, it's trying to form a new idea of, okay, so where are we really operating now? What is reality? And so there is that inclination to find safety in those details. And if I can just get every single detail out there, that will somehow make this okay. The thing of that is, and we would refer you to prior podcasts to hear more about this in detail, is that there is such a thing as too much when it comes to details.
Yes.
There is a line where we stop doing positive work for a spouse and we start creating a whole set of negative triggers, right? For example, when we start getting into specifics of body type, hair color, etc., those pieces of information, again, it depends on the case, but in most cases I've observed, those pieces of that level of detail doesn't add anything to a disclosure to a partner, whether it's a formal disclosure or in the moment. What it does is it creates a whole new set of triggers for the partner, right? So for example, if I drill down with my husband and I get him to admit that, you know, this body type or this hair color are the things that were really triggering this time around, that hasn't helped him to be more accountable. It hasn't created a greater space for me to heal. What it's done is now raise the risk of me feeling averse or unsafe every time I run across a brunette now.
Right.
Right. Or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And every time we're in public and I see a person like that,
exactly,
right, I'm triggering now as a spouse.
So we're way past accountability at that point. We're now in this realm of, you know, we're literally kind of spreading emotional landmines out, like we're like fertilizer in front of us along the path, right?
Right.
Without really helping anything. So anyway, that's another reason why a therapist can be so helpful, is to kind of navigate that line.
But that does not negate the fact that you have the right as a spouse to ask any and all questions that you have.
Exactly.
And I don't put any kind of limitations on my spouses when we're early in this process. I say, I want you to get it all out there.
Yes.
And absolutely. I have them, in fact, I have them provide that in writing.
Oh yeah.
I ask all of it. And then let's take that as now a starting place and let's go from there.
Yeah, and we will take those and we will usually, as therapists, work through those questions with the husband or with the addict in this case, right? And we will go through. We will get answers to all of those in advance that are already pre-prepared.
Yep.
Now, obviously, sometimes questions will come up as part of the disclosure, which is fine. Again, we don't want to get caught too much in the details here today for sake of time, but for the idea is that we flesh as much of that out in advance so that you can get the most. You have the opportunity to ask everything you need to ask, and the addict has the opportunity to provide the most transparent, fleshed out, real, raw answers as possible.
Yep.
So that we're not navigating that on the fly.
And that doesn't mean there won't be other questions along the way. We invite those.
Yep.
And actually questions, during and after a disclosure can take place as well.
Yes, for sure.
Right. Number 3 is you have the right as a spouse to have a full voice in all of this process. And what we mean by a full voice is kind of think of it like maybe a court case, right? The person who's on trial it's come out everything that he's done, but how about the victim? The victim gets to have her voice. And a lot of times, Steve, what you and I do in this is her preparing what we call an impact statement. Here's how this has impacted me, both in the past and currently, my fears going forward. Here are all the ways that this has had an impact on my life. You get to have a voice to express all of that.
Yes. And there are different ways to do that, right? At a baseline, we usually start off with what we call like a victim impact letter, right? Something that you will prepare in advance that allows you to really kind of advocate and just get out there, both things that you have talked about before, as well as things that you haven't, in terms of let's make a complete, accounting of this is the way that this has affected me, both for negative and in some cases for good, right? Depending on where we're at in the recovery process. This is kind of our vision for the future, or my vision for our future, or not, right? Whatever it is. But it is a time where you are able to get that out there and have, and really our job as therapists is to get your addict partner in a place where he or she is able to hear that.
Yep.
Right?
And then we start to talk about things like be present, lean into your pain.
Yes.
Learn how to not go defensive, and all of those things that we talk about. But your third right is to have a full voice.
Absolutely.
In how this is impacting you. And then the final one, the fourth, is the right to specific, and I'm enunciating that word, the right to specific reconciliation and amends. If this is all on the table, you've had your impact, you've fully expressed all of that. The question now is, okay, now what? If we're going to go forward, what does that look like? And not in generalities. Well, I'll do my best to fix this. No, we're going to get very, very specific. And so we help the addict, for example, put together a reconciliation letter or statement where we as therapists help him to get very specific on what he is going to do going forward, what that looks like. So this whole area of reconciliation and amends, you as a spouse have a right to that and to express the things you expect, that you desire.
Absolutely. And that is really critical for both you as well as the addict, because it does provide a stepping stone for how do we get to a place of, again, making amends and reconciling as much as possible, right? Recognizing everything we talk about with the trauma piece about, he can't heal you and all the other stuff we discussed, but it does provide at least that stepping stone to begin to find that. Along with that, guys, I mean, you've kind of heard us talk about it a little bit as we've gone on, but can't emphasize this enough. These really need to be facilitated by a therapist. Okay. Ideally, in a perfect world, like one-on-one with each partner, but at a bare minimum, I mean, they need to really include the direct intervention of a therapist who can kind of walk you through and prep both of you for this process. You can do lots of harm or lots of good in a disclosure. And for example, me as a certified sex addiction therapist, I had a part of that process was literally 30 hours of training on disclosure and like how that happens, how that looks. Like it's a long, vigorous process, and it's one that's really important and can be really pivotal for healing. But we want to do everything we can to make sure that it's going to be, as helpful and as positive for you. So to whatever degree you're able to, please do involve that.
Yeah. Think of this as you're watching one of those crazy things on TV and the warning label comes up and says, please do not try this at home, or right, to be attempted by professionals only. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And it really is that kind of an event.
It is, because I've been doing this for, over 20 years and have pretty much seen so many examples of when this is done in a healthy way, in a boundaried way, in a guided way, and when it isn't. Mm-hmm. And there is a big, big difference. Sometimes the hardest work I do with couples is when they have attempted this on their own, and then finding when everything is collapsing around them, they come to me and say, Mark, please fix this.
Yeah.
And absolutely. It is enormously difficult for me to do that. We absolutely do have success, but I would have much preferred if they would have included me from the beginning.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So anyway, we appreciate you letting us tackle this topic today. I know it's a little bit more specific than some of the topics we tackle, but it's an important one because this is a huge part of the healing process, and figuring out for you as a spouse where this can fit into your healing process, where this can fit into your coupleship, and how can it benefit primarily you, but also the both of you in your relationship, is a discussion that every coupleship should be having if they haven't done one of these yet. Because like I said, it can actually be a really connecting experience if done correctly. I know we're maybe making this sound like doom and gloom. There is a lot of intense work beforehand, but just like we have disclosures that can go really poorly if they're not correctly handled, I've done lots of disclosures where it really was the turning point for a relationship.
Yeah, the turning point where real intimacy finally becomes possible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you really do see a shift in the relationship. I would say, in fact, the vast majority of the disclosures I'm involved with, that is the case.
Yes.
Right? When they come out, are like, wow, we never imagined that would do this for us.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so, yeah, lots and lots of hope, lots and lots of, great things going forward once you move through this process.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, hey, as always, have a great week. We so appreciate you being here. We love tackling topics like this. As you can see, time goes so fast and we can barely scratch the surface. We would love to see each of you give a try to our Dare to Connect program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We offer a 2-week free trial with that. We'd love to have you come check it out. 3 times a week, we dig into these issues in a way that we simply cannot do on a podcast. Yeah. You have a chance to interact with us. We're bringing new features onto that program all the time, and would love to have you guys come join us and really take the healing process to the next level. It's anonymous, it's confidential. You get the best of both Mark and I with, at a very low cost. So we'd love to see you there.
So daretoconnectnow.com.
Absolutely. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.